For 70 years, almost no one on earth knew their names. They were two ordinary American men, one in a quiet suburb of Chicago, one in a small town in Florida. They worked, they raised families, they grew old like anyone else. And then on the 8th of May in the year 2025, their baby brother walked onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica as Pope Leo XIV. And suddenly, the world wanted to know everything about the two men who had grown up beside him. So they finally spoke. And what they told us pulls back the curtain on the real family that made a pope, because here is the truth almost no one understands. Pope Leo XIV did not fall out of the sky. He was the youngest of three brothers, the baby of an ordinary Catholic household. And the two men who knew him longest, who shared his bedroom walls, his dinner table, and his mother's rosary, have started telling the world the things the Vatican never could. Who he really is, where he came from, and the quiet, unbreakable bond that to this day the most powerful man in the world refuses to let go of. Before we go any further, take 1 second to tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps these stories alive, and it truly means more than you know. Now, let's meet the two brothers of the Pope. Start with the simple shape of the family, because it matters. There were three Prevost boys, raised in a modest house on the far south side of Chicago, in the suburb of Dalton. The eldest was Louis Martín Prevost. Then came the middle son, John Joseph Prevost, and then the baby of the family, born on the 14th of September in the year 1955, Robert Francis Prevost, the one the world now calls Holy Father. Three brothers, one bond, and two very different men left behind to tell the story. Let's begin with John, the middle brother, because he may be the single closest human being to the Pope on this earth. John Prevost is a retired Catholic school principal. He spent his career, like both of his parents, in education, and today he lives a quiet life in New Lenox, Illinois, a suburb not far from where the three boys grew up. He is in his early 70s now, an ordinary, gentle, retired man. And he holds a secret that tells you everything about his little brother. Because here is what John revealed, and it is the detail that melts people's hearts. Even now, even after the white smoke, even after his brother became the spiritual leader of more than 1 billion people, the two of them talk on the phone every single day. Every day. The Pope of the Catholic Church picks up the phone and calls his big brother in Illinois, just like he always has. And it gets better. They play games together. John told reporters their daily routine in his own words. First, he said, they do Wordle because that is the regular thing, and then they do words with friends. Picture that. The most powerful religious figure on the planet, texting his retired brother over a word puzzle, the same as millions of ordinary siblings around the world. And then John said something that breaks your heart a little. He admitted he was worried. Worried that now that his little brother is the Pope, those daily phone calls, that simple sacred routine of two aging brothers checking in on each other, might have to change. Sit with that for a moment. While the whole world celebrated a historic election, one of the few people who truly knew Robert Prevost was quietly mourning something small and precious, the everyday closeness of a brother. That is the human cost no headline mentioned. And John will never forget the day everything changed. He was at home in New Lenox when the white smoke rose over Rome. And here is the humbling truth. Like almost everyone else on earth, he found out his own brother had become Pope by turning on the television. He switched it on, saw what was happening, and grabbed the phone to call his niece. The two of them sat there in pure disbelief, repeating to each other that it could not possibly be real. And then, all at once, his quiet world exploded. His cell phone, his iPad, his home phone, every device he owned went off at the same time, ringing and buzzing without end. In a single instant, a retired principal from the Chicago suburbs had become the brother of the most famous man on earth, and the whole world wanted to speak to him. When reporters reached him, he could barely find the language for it. There are no words, he said, there are no words. Think about how strange that moment must have been. For 70 years, John had simply had a little brother named Rob, a priest, then a bishop, then a cardinal, yes, but still Rob. The brother he called. The brother he beat at Wordle. And in the span of a few minutes, in front of the entire world, that little brother became the vicar of Christ, the spiritual father of more than 1 billion people. How do you hold both of those truths in your heart at once? How do you keep calling him every day the way you always have, when half the planet now kneels at his name? That is the impossible, beautiful tension John Prevost has lived with ever since. And by every account, he has handled it the way this family handles everything. With humility, with love, and with a quiet refusal to let the man vanish behind the title. And here is the reassuring part of the story, the part the world did not see coming. Months later, when his brother's papacy reached its first 100 days, John sat down again. This time alongside the pastor of his own parish in New Lenox, Father Ray Flores, to mark the milestone. And the fear he had carried at the very beginning, that the papacy would swallow his brother whole and end their closeness, had not come true. John reported that his brother actually seemed to be finding joy in being pope, despite the crushing weight of it all. The man had not disappeared. The brother was still there. Whatever else had changed, the thread between a quiet house in New Lenox and the Vatican itself still held. And think about what that tells you about Robert Prevost. A man can be handed the heaviest office on earth, the prayers and burdens of more than 1 billion souls, and still find a way to remain a brother. Still find the minutes in his day to reach across an ocean to the people who knew him before he was anyone at all. In a role that has broken lesser men, he has held on to the one thing that made him who he is, his family. But John did not just share the present. He opened the door to the past, to the boy Robert used to be, and his memories are the foundation of everything. John describes a childhood soaked in faith. After dinner, every single night, the family knelt and prayed the rosary together. The father would read aloud from the Bible, and in the middle of it all were 3 boys learning, without even realizing it, how to pray. And John has said, again and again, the line that has now traveled around the world: there was never a doubt in anyone's mind about what Robert was going to become. From the time he was a small boy, the family simply knew Robert was going to be a priest. John remembers his little brother playing at being a priest, turning the household ironing board into a pretend altar draped with a sheet, handing out candy as pretend communion. He was 5, maybe 6 years old, and no one in that house was surprised. They could see the calling in the boy before the boy could even understand it himself. And John has gone even further than that. He says his little brother knew he wanted to be a priest from the time he could walk. From the time he could walk. There was no dramatic conversion, no teenage crisis, no lightning bolt out of the sky. There was simply a little boy who, as far back as anyone could remember, was already pointed straight at the altar. All 3 boys served at that altar and sang in the choir. But with Robert it was different, deeper, more certain. Their father, Louis Sr., was a school superintendent, a man of order and discipline. Their mother was the librarian who filled the house with books and prayer. And in that home, Robert's vocation was never something anyone had to wrestle with. It was as ordinary a fact of family life as the dinner dishes. And it was not only the family who saw it. John has shared one of the most astonishing details of all. When Robert was just a small boy, in kindergarten or 1st grade, the neighbors on their street were already saying it out loud. A parent across the street and another down the block both predicted that this particular Prevost boy would grow up to become the first American pope. In kindergarten. Decades before it could possibly make sense, the people of an ordinary Chicago street were already pointing at the youngest brother and calling his future. John has never forgotten it. How could he? The neighbors turned out to be right, and there was something deeper in that family that even the brothers did not fully know until the world dug it up. Their mother's people carried Creole Catholic roots, reaching all the way back to the 7th Ward of New Orleans, a proud, historically black Catholic neighborhood. The faith in that home was not shallow, and it was not recent. It had been carried north from Louisiana through generations, guarded through hardship and prejudice, and planted in a little house on the south side of Chicago. These 3 boys were not simply being raised Catholic. They were the newest link in a chain of faith that stretched back more than a century. John also gave the world a description of his brother's character that, once you hear it, you cannot unhear. He has, John said, the patience of a saint. Even as a child, Robert was the calm one, the still one, the one who thought before he spoke and answered slowly from somewhere deep. In a loud house with two older brothers, the youngest was the quiet center. And John, who has watched him for 70 years, says that has never changed. The calm man the world now sees on the balcony is the exact same calm boy John grew up with. Now let's cross the country to the other brother. Because if John is the gentle, quiet keeper of the family memory, Louis is something else entirely. And the contrast between them tells you something important about this family. Louis Prevost is the eldest of the three. Today he lives in Port Charlotte, Florida, with his wife Deborah. And like their father before him, Louis served his country in the military, spending years in the Navy. Where John is soft-spoken and reserved, Louis is blunt, outspoken, colorful, the kind of older brother who says exactly what he thinks. Three brothers and no two of them alike. One a quiet educator, one a plain-spoken Navy veteran, and one a missionary who would become Pope. And yet underneath all those differences, the bond held. In fact, Louis had been drafted while he was still in college, sent into the Navy just as their father had served before them. Three brothers, three completely different roads. The military man, the educator, the missionary priest. And here is what makes their story quietly powerful. Brothers do not always agree. Brothers are not always alike. Any family with more than one child knows that people raised under the very same roof can grow into very different adults, with different temperaments and different views of the world. The Prevosts are no exception, and they have never pretended to be. And yet the thread that runs back to that little house in Dalton has never once snapped. Whatever their differences, they remained at the deepest level three brothers who loved each other. Family for them was never about being the same. It was forged in something older and stronger, at a kitchen table, in a mother's rosary, in a shared childhood that none of them could ever leave behind. And Louis gave us one of the most precious windows of all, because Louis knew this was coming, in a way no one else did. Before the conclave, before the cardinals ever locked the doors of the Sistine Chapel, Louis had a conversation with his little brother. He asked him in his own words, "What happens if you win? If they vote for you, are you going to accept it?" Think about that. A regular American family on the phone, half joking and half serious, talking about whether their baby brother might come home as the Pope. Louis later said his brother had, in his words, a 1 in 3 chance of becoming Pope. And when it actually happened, when the name was announced, Louis's reaction was not some grand theological statement. It was pure family. "It's Rob," he said. "It's Rob." And then came the moment the cameras caught, the one that says more than any interview. After the Pope's inaugural Mass, his big brother Louis was there in Rome, and the two of them embraced. The Holy Father of the Catholic Church, in his white robes, wrapping his arms around his outspoken older brother from Florida. In that hug was 70 years of shared history. Two boys from Dalton, now an old man and a Pope, holding on to each other in the middle of St. Peter's. No title in the world could touch what passed between them in that moment. Two brothers, separated by an ocean and by the most extraordinary title on earth. And for a few seconds, none of it mattered at all. There was only Rob and his big brother holding on. Louis has also been the one to set the record straight on the small human details, the kind only a brother would defend. When some reporters claimed the new Pope was a Chicago Cubs fan, it was the family who corrected them. No. He is and always has been a White Sox man, loyal to the working-class South Side team, the one that loses far more than it wins. It is a tiny thing, but it is the kind of tiny thing only the people who truly know you can protect. And his brothers protected it, and that instinct to protect runs through everything the brothers say. Almost overnight, John and Louis went from being two anonymous retired men to being the most sought-after relatives on the planet. Reporters, cameras, requests from every corner of the world, and in interview after interview, you can hear them doing the same quiet thing, pulling the story back down to earth, reminding everyone that behind the white robes and the ancient titles is a real human being they have known their entire lives. To the world he is the Holy Father, the 267th successor of St. Peter. To them he is the kid brother who played priest with an ironing board, who roots for a team that loses, who still loses to John at Words with Friends. They are not trying to shrink him. They are trying to keep him human, because they understand something the rest of the world is still catching up to. The greatness of this man was never separate from his ordinariness. It grew straight up out of it. Now step back and look at the family these two men describe, because this is the real heart of the story. The title asks about the family that made him, and the answer is not complicated or glamorous. It is almost shockingly ordinary. Their father was Louis Marius Prevost, a veteran of the Second World War who served in the Navy, and a man of education, a school administrator. Their mother was Mildred Martinez Prevost, a librarian who had fought her way to a master's degree at a time when few women did, a gifted singer whose signature song was the Ave Maria, and a woman of deep, daily, unshakable faith. There was no money to speak of, no power, no famous name, just a working-class Catholic home where faith and learning were the air the boys breathed. And both of those parents are gone now. Louis Sr. and Mildred, the schoolman and the librarian, the two people who built that house of faith and learning, did not live to see their youngest son become Pope. Mildred died back in the year 1990 of cancer, when Robert was still only a missionary priest serving in Peru, decades from any throne. So the three brothers carry the memory of that home alone now. When John describes the nightly rosary, when Louis defends the White Sox loyalty, or recalls their mother's beloved Ave Maria, they are not just offering trivia for the cameras. They are the last living keepers of a world that no longer exists, a small Catholic household on the south side of Chicago that against every probability on earth produced a pope. Every story they tell is a way of keeping their parents and that vanished home alive a little longer. And now, because their youngest brother wears the white robes, those private family memories have stopped being private at all. They have become a window the whole world gets to look through, into the ordinary, faithful, working-class home where a pope was quietly made. And the brothers are clear about where the faith came from. It came from that kitchen table, from the rosary every night, from a mother who lived her belief out loud and a father who read them scripture. The three boys all served at the altar, all sang in the choir, and out of that completely ordinary household on a quiet street in Dalton came a Navy veteran, a school principal, and a pope. The same upbringing, three different lives, one shared root. There is something profound hidden in that, because the world tends to imagine that a pope must come from somewhere extraordinary, some holy, rarefied place. But the two brothers who finally spoke have told us the opposite. He came from exactly where they came from, the same parents, the same prayers, the same small house. The difference was not the soil. It was what God grew in one of the three seeds planted in it. And his brothers, who grew up in that same soil, are perhaps the only people alive who can say with total authority just how ordinary the beginnings of this extraordinary man really were. And maybe that is why their voices matter so much right now. In a world hungry to turn the Pope into a symbol, a flag, a political weapon, his brothers keep dragging the story back down to earth, back to the truth. To them, he is not first and foremost the vicar of Christ or a historic figure. He is Rob, the baby of the family, the quiet one who played priest with an ironing board. The kid brother John still beats at Wordle some mornings. The little brother Louie still raps in a bear hug. The man who, against all the odds and all the demands of the most impossible job on earth, still picks up the phone to call his brother in Illinois every single day. That is the family that made him. Not royalty, not wealth. Three brothers in a small house, a librarian mother on her knees, a Navy father with a Bible, and a faith passed from one generation to the next at a kitchen table after dinner. The Vatican gave the world a pope. But it was that ordinary American family that gave the world the man. And here is the thought that lingers, the one the brothers themselves keep circling back to. None of them planned this. None of them engineered it. Two of those three boys grew up to live normal, faithful, hidden lives, a principal and a Navy man, and they are at peace with that. Only one was called to the balcony, and the ones left behind are not jealous, not bitter, not grasping for the spotlight. They are simply proud, and a little protective and quietly worried about losing their daily phone calls with the brother they love. In an age of ego, there is something almost holy about that. A family that produced a pope and stayed at heart, just a family. So let me ask you, when you look at your own family, your own ordinary home, do you ever wonder what God might be quietly preparing inside it, in someone no one is watching yet? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Your presence here and your support mean everything to this channel and help us keep telling these stories. Next, we will reveal something about this family that even fewer people know. Long before Robert Prevost was ever born, his mother had two sisters who quietly gave their entire lives to God as nuns, and one of them served the church for an astonishing 77 years. It is a hidden chapter of the Pope's bloodline that almost no one has ever heard. Until then, may God watch over you and the family he gave you, wherever in the world you are.